Hello. In this video I'm going to talk about the first 6 months of my channel, and I thought I would divide this roughly into 3 sections. The first covering why I started the channel, the second how I think it went, and the third where it will go from here. Now, I have previously said why I started the channel, so I'm going to tell the story from a slightly different perspective. And I'm going to start with this document, or chapbook if you like. It's a 20-page if you include the covers. And it's a brief chronology of the Fantasy Centre in Holloway Road, the premier sort of second-hand hub for science fiction readers and collectors for probably 40 years. And a major influence to me and many other science fiction collectors. And I'll tell you why this came about briefly. On the back of this book has an image of the final catalogue issued by the Fantasy Centre, and I have a copy of that myself, some of the books on the back. It's the only booklet I've got left now, or catalogue. I never used to be sent them. I just used to occasionally pick one up in the shop. There was one spare. So why is that a reason for talking about my channel? So basically, what I can say, Graham was a customer since probably the early 70s, just after it started. And he didn't want the history of the Fantasy Centre to fade into oblivion, if you like. So in 2023, he decided to write a history about the Fantasy Centre. I'm sorry if my voice is going. It's not too reliable at the moment. Now, the Fantasy Centre was important for a very large number of readers and collectors. I didn't find it until, I think, 1999. And certainly around the turn of the millennium, London was a brilliant place for anyone who was a reader or a collector. But it gradually went downhill, and Eric, in his final piece in the final catalogue, sort of spoke about that and gave some of the reasons why the Fantasy Centre closed. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about collecting, but basically when the Fantasy Centre closed, Eric and Ted, who ran it, with a number of customers, I think there were 8 of us who were regulars and another half dozen who would turn up occasionally, agreed to meet once a month in the pub to reminisce about science fiction and old times. And basically by 2023, of those 8 regulars, 1 had moved many, many miles from London, and 4 had passed away, so there were only 3 of us left. And Graham decided he wanted to put down on paper a history of the Fantasy Centre, while, as he put it, there's still enough of us alive to remember it. So I didn't know he was doing this, but he liaised with printers. He wrote the text, he did everything himself, and he did a first edition, and the first edition he circulated, and that provoked a few more comments, and so he did a second edition, not a huge run, and that's the printing history, and the second edition was 20 copies, and this is number 9, so he numbered them. And basically that's set me thinking about my collection. I was obviously wondering what might happen if and when something happens to me. And also it set me wondering, are there any things that I've done or that I could put into the public domain that would be lost if I go? And one of the things was the research into the VGSF paperbacks. Now, Eric had started me on collecting publisher sets. So I think he was the one, I won't swear to this, who suggested I started collecting the Yellow Spine doors. And he definitely was the one who suggested I collected the Timescapes. And basically, around the time the Fantasy Centre was closing, I was looking for a new area to collect. Postage from the States had become more expensive because surface postage had disappeared. And basically, I decided to collect the VGSF paperbacks. And it took a few years and a lot of research, but I did collect every one. And I was very aware that there was no comprehensive information out there about the VGSF paperbacks. So I did want to get it into the public domain. Now, I did think about doing the equivalent of a chapbook. So an example is this one by Griffin Books, Double Your Pleasure, and it's a booklet about all the ACE-SF doubles. It's basically a listing of all the ACE-SF doubles. And I thought maybe I could do that with the VGSF paperbacks. But I saw the hassle that Graham went through in getting his published, and he only got a small number of copies done. And then he had the problem of distributing them and posting them to people and trying to find out their names and addresses of those who were interested. So basically I decided that publishing a booklet probably wasn't for me. Now 2023, at the end of, was probably the first time I'd ever looked at anything on YouTube. I think Google pointed me to a few YouTube videos, and it struck me that might be a better way of getting information out into the public domain. It was free, it was relatively easy, and so I started toying with the idea of setting up a YouTube channel. And I took a few months to experiment. At the time I only had my iPad, so I experimented on recording videos and generally thinking about how I would approach it and start the channel. And in October 2024, I started the channel. So that covers the reasons for the starting of the channel. Did I have any other expectations? Not particularly. I had no wish to be a YouTube personality. I had no real interest in the IT, the technical side of producing videos, editing them, or anything else. So I think early on I decided I would do everything as a single take, not fuss about if I made bloopers or errors, and basically run it very simply. So that was it. I did wonder whether there might be any possibility of selling some of my duplicates via YouTube. I did wonder if there was any possibility of encouraging someone to sell me their collection, because I still collect. And while I'm still wondering what I do with my collection, I still want to carry on improving what I consider the core of my collection, which is my A format paperbacks. So I had a few other thoughts as to what might happen when I run my channel, but no clear objectives. So some of my earliest videos were on the VGSF paperbacks and how they fitted into early Gollancz paperback production. And the first video, when I last checked, had 219 views. Now, how many of those people actually found that useful, I do not know. But I'm assuming a fairly small percentage did find it very useful, will have downloaded the spreadsheets that I'd arranged for Jules Burt to host and Richard Rempel of Vintage SF to host. So I probably got a better circulation of information than I ever would have by trying to produce a booklet. So in that sense, I'm very content. Now I'll briefly talk about analytics and what I found. Thanks to the early Gollancz paperbacks that I covered, my membership or subscriptions went up to, certainly quickly went up to the 80s, thanks particularly to those two channels I've mentioned. And by Christmas had reached 100. And basically since Christmas, the subscriptions have stuck within 2 of that figure all the way to date. So my channel hasn't been a huge success. Now that didn't worry me in the sense of monetizing. I had no particular wish to monetize. But it did make me wonder whether what I was producing was what people wanted. When I look around YouTube at other SF channels, a lot of them seem to be devoted to reviewing books, recommending books, picking their best 5 or 10 of the year, or of fantasy, or of an author, and so on and so forth. Now that's not the sort of channel I'm perhaps interested in. I'm perhaps more interested in the history of science fiction and what has happened, and in collecting. Now I'm not saying I dislike all those channels, and for some of those channels, those who, for example, show the different covers that have been produced for the book, perhaps talk about the history and how other authors perhaps have influenced the book, I found very interesting. But a general review of the story and all the rest wasn't perhaps my cup of tea. Now I toyed with the idea of doing something on selling and buying, but I think I've given that up. I'm not finding as much these days, and generally I'm not buying many duplicates, so I haven't really pushed myself to try and sell stuff. I did in the past sell a few on eBay, but with the changes I'm not certain I want to carry on that line. So for me, YouTube didn't live up to its expectations in terms of selling, in terms of buying. No one said, you know, I've got a collection near London, would you like to come and see it, which is what I was hoping for. I'm not so interested in newer books. I won't turn them down if I see them, and basically that's all I can find to collect at the moment. But I really would hope that someone would have a massive A format collection who might be interested in selling, but no luck so far. I mean, another thing that I've found, I'll briefly mention, well, before I get onto that, I'll briefly mention IT. When I started, I only had a an iPad. The phone I had, I didn't use for anything like YouTube. It had a problem with the battery. It was my wife's old phone. The battery would last about 8 hours, even if I didn't use it. So I'd go out perhaps in the morning with a full charge. By the time I came home at night, it'd be down to 10%, after 8 hours. The battery was going. It wasn't worth replacing the battery. So I got a new phone. One of the advantages was the camera was far, far better. I did invest in a tripod. And I did do a couple of videos using the tripod. I wasn't overly fond of it. And I had a few problems where if you clamp it wrong, it activates an emergency signal and threatens to call the emergency services. So it's not my favourite device. So that's that. So basically my channel has stagnated. I haven't got any new incentives to change it. I did a huge number of short videos, but they didn't seem to really catch on. I thought people might be interested in seeing the individual books and covers, but it wasn't of huge interest. It seems the interest in YouTube is elsewhere. And finally, so I don't get huge pleasure from talking to a camera screen. So, in a sense, there's nothing to compare with seeing people in the flesh and having a chat, especially over a drink. So I rely on the friends of the Fantasy Centre, who still meet once a month, even if in very reduced numbers. So that's the first 6 months and what I've found. What happens in the future? I think the first thing I decided was there was no way I was going to carry on producing lots of videos. If I carry on, it will be perhaps at most one a week. I think I will carry on doing the book haul videos because they do seem to get a reasonable number of views. But as for other things, I'm not certain that I'm going to dig that much out of my collection and talk about it. The other thing, as I was coming up to the 6-month anniversary, I thought I'd give some thought as to what I might do as a special video. I did record 5 separate videos doing a tour of my book room. Now, there's no way I could do a comprehensive tour. I mean, I did try and show every book, or nearly every book, in one bookcase. And if I'd have done that with the whole room, the videos would have amounted to many, many hours. So the rest of the tour, I did show some books, but not too many. And those videos will probably follow a week after this, or perhaps 2 weeks. I'm not going to edit or try and combine them, so I will release as 5 separate videos. I'll probably release all on one day, and that is that. I did have a couple of videos that I'd recorded that I wasn't convinced were good enough. I may release those. I'm still thinking about that. And other than that, I'm afraid the channel will reduce significantly. I hope you've enjoyed watching what I've put out. If there are special requests, I might be able to show you some. But with so much information being out there on the net, I'm not certain then I will be able to add that much. I, like anyone, can research things by reading up on Wikipedia, science fiction encyclopedias, etc., and researching through Goodreads and eBay and Bookfinder. So I'm not certain I can add anything unique. So in that sense, I'm not certain my channel would serve a huge purpose. If you'd like to pass any comments about either what I've done in the past or what I'm going to do in the future, please leave a comment. By all means, subscribe, although that boat may have sailed now. And thank you for watching. That's it. Thank you.